We have the honor to talk now with Paul Nickell, who was one of the directors of Studio One from virtually its beginning till its demise, I believe, along with Frank Schaffner. Well, I'd like to hear what you have to say about the Felix Jackson period, but maybe a way to start that is to talk about how it was different from the days with Tony.
Tony was with Tony, I don't know about Frank. Now, I was asked questions very often. Why did you do this? And I'd better have an answer. Mm-hmm. Once the answer I gave satisfied Tony, that was fine. There were no problems. And he was very observant. He had a pictorial eye like I've never seen. I remember one small thing. In rehearsal one day, he turned to me, and he came down on Thursdays before the show on Monday. Mm-hmm. He came down on Thursdays to see how the show was going. And all of a sudden he turned to me and said, "Where'd you get that fourth camera?" I said, "Huh? What?" He said, "Well, you're using 3 right now. What are you cutting to on this shot?" Well, I didn't have any answer for that. It's simply it slipped. Mm-hmm. So of course I did a little restaging and there was no problem. Felix was more easygoing. He demanded your best. I don't think he went on beyond that. Tony always wanted a little more than what you thought your best was. He wanted you to think a little more deeply about that scene or about that character. And he was absolutely right. It didn't happen very often, but when it did happen, he was right. Mm-hmm. I always liked, I enjoyed working with Felix after the initial show.
1984.
1984, and I was terrified. I have never been so nervous in my life. It was a big show. It was almost an unwieldy show. Cast, it seemed like of thousands. Of course it wasn't. And but the leads in the show were simply marvelous. Eddie Albert was the common man. Lorne Greene, the late, I'm sorry to say, Lorne Greene, was the Inquisitor. And Norma Crane, the late Norma Crane. Yes. And it was her first big role. I auditioned that poor girl, must have been 8, 10, 12 times. Mm-hmm. I was so nervous. The show was so important to get Felix off, to try to maintain what credibility I had, that to put an unknown actress into the role was just, seemed to me insane, and yet I knew she was right, somehow. Perhaps an instinct I'd picked up from Tony, I don't know. But it was big and unwieldy. We had, I think, a 5th camera on that show.
In those small studios.
It was a monstrous show. But my students at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill would say, "Oh, Mr. Nickell, what's your best show?" I'd say, "Well, that's up to you. I have no idea what my best show is. But I'll tell you this, I think 1984 was my most important show. I think it had something to say that people should be listening at." And I know my next door neighbor in Bronxville would not speak to me for about 3 weeks. She said she'd never been so depressed in her life. She and her husband had just returned from South America and said, "Paul, it's exactly the way it is down there." Mm. And I understand the sponsor's wife was very upset with the program, and that Felix received a call from the sponsor the next day saying his wife could not sleep last night. I said, "Good. That's marvelous. Exactly what it should have been.
Yeah. That's a function that television can
Right.
do remarkably well when it wants to.
And when there's no sponsor interference. Well, I remember some scripts. The Remarkable Incident at Carson Corners.
Oh yeah, Reggie Rose.
Reggie Rose. And the whole theme of the thing is which one of us is guilty.
Mm-hmm.
This was a trial of the school janitor by these 6th, 7th, 8th grade kids, maybe even younger, because one of their classmates had fallen from a balcony and it was due to his negligence. And as it progressed, everybody had been negligent in something, so who's guilty? I loved Reggie Rose's scripts.
Yeah, they were marvelous. There were a Rod Serling, I believe, also.
I never did a Rod Serling script, but I always wanted to.
Frank tended to get the Reggie Rose scripts.
He got 12 Angry Men, and I don't
Thunder on
remember
Sycamore Street.
Thunder on Sycamore Street, yes. Mm-hmm. I know, going back to 1984, finally at one point I went in and I said, Felix, I think I'm the wrong director for this. I think Frank has been a journalist, he's been in news, and in his very quiet little manner, Felix said, you will direct the show. Now there was something about it that he wanted. He never told me what it was, but I never did that before, and I had never done it since. To go to a producer with that kind of a suggestion.
Just a question. With 1984, did you try to bring in some topical references?
I beg your pardon?
Or have any reference to the McCarthy period at all? Did you try to make that somewhat implicit in the play, or did you try to comment upon other situations happening at the time?
Tony talks in his book about the McCarthy period and some problems.
Let me ask it for the
I'm
for
sorry.
the camera.
Excuse me.
That's all right. In doing 1984, did you go to any effort at all to draw a parallel between the thematic material of the novel and what was happening in the country, in the United States at that time, McCarthy and so on?
I did not go to any length to do that. That's what I wanted to come out, subconsciously, at least. Because I know when I was still, when Tony was still the producer, I didn't know this until I read that book, that there had been some difficulty. I had heard through the grapevine about actors and people like that, producers, who were being investigated. But what Tony has to say in the book was quite revealing to me. I knew nothing about it. I hope that came through in 1984. I hope it came through even more in a show called An Almanac of Liberty, which Reginald Rose adapted from Chief Justice Douglas' book, kind of a diary, An Almanac of Liberty. And I showed that a few times to my students. And I said, you're going to hear very heavy music. I gave them the date for the show. I'd say, what was going on in the United States during those years? Well, occasionally someone would say, it was the McCarthy hearings. You got it. So the music was very heavy. And then Charles Collingwood, very young Charles Collingwood, came on the screen, and the book had been published that day, was on the market that day. And Collingwood talked about that. He talked about the book a little bit. He talked about how Reggie had taken this kind of diary and fashioned a script from it. I thought it was an important show because it had something to say about that very thing.
Were you aware at all during the Felix Jackson period of the blacklist as far as actors are concerned?
Yes, I was.
Because we did hear about it. Chiz Schultz and Betty Stein were able to talk about how it operated.
That I don't know. But I know that if I'd go to Felix or even Tony and say, what do you think about so-and-so for this part? Well, Paul, I'll try, but I don't think there's a chance in the world. And it was always said with such a kind of tone that I knew, and I just asked no more questions and walked away.
It was a terrible period.
It was terrible.